There is an announcement before we move to leaders' questions. Just to say, I wish to announce for the information of the House that I have received a letter of resignation on the 21st of November from Pascal Donoghue as a member of Dáil Éireann for the constituency of Dublin Central, and in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 238, the resignation took effect upon receipt of the letter. Thank you, members. We now move to leaders' questions under Standing Order 38. Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
I understand that Taoiseach's back in the country. He should be here taking questions. Minister, the cost of home heating oil has shot up €80 in just 1 month. It's a big blow. The average price for a fill of oil is now a staggering €980. And this hike hits more than 1 million households, mostly rural families and the elderly, who rely on oil to heat their homes. And here's the real kick in the teeth, Minister. This unaffordable cost of home heating oil has been driven up by your decisions. €220 of the cost of a fill of oil is already carbon tax, and your planned increases will add a further €150 in the time ahead. It has to be asked, how on earth do you think people can afford that? One family contacted me yesterday. They got a fill of heating oil last week, and they haven't turned on the heating since Friday because they need that fill to last over Christmas and throughout the new year. They're rationing their heat. The weather is colder now, and the reality is that more and more working households struggle to pay their bills, to light and heat their homes. Energy is unaffordable and people are being ripped off. You met with the top brass at energy companies back in September, Minister. And what happened? Well, the majority hiked up their electricity prices, no fear of any consequence. Then, with winter on the horizon and energy bills going up, you chose to cancel energy credits in October's budget. A terrible decision, withdrawing the one bit of help people relied on to pay those rip-off bills. In fact, you delivered a budget of €9.4 billion that left working people worse off. No cost of living package while households are being hammered with no end in sight. Social Justice Ireland reported yesterday how your slashing of cost of living supports has ratcheted up pressure and pushed more households into financial distress. People literally live in dread of the next electricity or gas or heating bill, and I meet working parents who tell me they've bought extra blankets for their kids' beds because they can't afford to turn on the heat, elderly people going to bed early to stay warm, couples, often with 2 incomes, borrowing from family members to pay their energy bills. Desperate situations, Minister, and your government sticks its head in the sand. Tá rialtas ag bar an rangamaidir le saoil na níní a dhéanamh níos deacra. Tá sé le feiceáil a rís san ardú ar phráis san ulla den taistí. Taistíonn gníomh a cheolaí a dhéanamh an saoil níos inachmhaine. On the watch of government, the cost of lighting and heating a home has become unaffordable, and this simply can't go on. Households can't take any more. I know exactly what government has done to make life harder for people, Minister. It's obvious. You withdrew energy credits, you give free rein to energy companies to hike up prices, you heap on additional carbon taxes onto home heating oil, you've cancelled cost of living supports, you delivered a budget of billions that abandon people. All bad choices that have made things even worse. So I now want to ask you, what action will be taken to make life affordable for people? Or will you simply continue to sit back and allow households to take the pain?
Deputy Minister.
I don't agree with you at all. I think if you just look at the measures that have been taken in the budget are targeted measures to help those who need it most, particularly in the area of social protection. We've increased the fuel allowance substantially, and we've expanded that fuel allowance to about 460,000 households right the way across this country. You've ignored that, one of the most significant changes that we've made. Another change on foot of the interim report on the National Energy Affordability Task Force is the effective permanent reduction of VAT from 13.5% to 9% for gas and electricity, bringing about a saving of over €100 per annum for households, a permanent change there. Yes, you're correct. We have not extended the energy credits because we believe that the €3.5 billion that was used there at the appropriate time is more appropriate to go into structural measures, such as investing in our grid, investing in grid capacity, and we've also provided equity of €3.5 billion to EirGrid and to ESBN. What will that do? It'll allow them to finance the investment that's required in our grid in projects like the North-South Interconnector, Deputy. North-South Interconnector, that one project that will deliver resilience for our grid, will allow the extension and expansion of renewables into our grid as well. A project actually that your own party seem to be flip-flopping on the north of the border. I've met your ministers in the north of Ireland who are for the project. Your deputies in the south are opposed to it. That's a permanent measure that will deliver affordability. That will deliver affordability. So I met Kiva Archibald, I've met Liz Kimmins. All of your colleagues in the north are taking the right position. They want to see this delivered. Now, what do we do in the meantime? Energy, yes, we have affordability issues unquestionably. That's why we established the National Energy Affordability Task Force. We've brought forward interim measures already. That work is continuing, and we will continue and publish a report in 2026, looking at some permanent measures that we can change. What you haven't referred to either is the Eurostat report, just published last week, that shows Ireland mid-ranking now with European colleagues in relation to energy affordability. But yes, for households and many households, these bills are expensive and some struggle to pay them. That's why I met the energy providers. All four of the main providers have actually confirmed, again to me at my request, that hardship funds will be set up. What I would say to people who are in arrears as well, the state is there to support you through the fuel allowance payments as well, but no one will be cut off either. And I've again had that confirmed, again at my request, that people will work with providers through this winter period. There is a reality, Deputy, as well, is that we're still far too dependent on imported fossil fuel. And that's why we need to expand renewables across the country. That's why 41% of our electricity last year was generated through renewable sources. And we'll continue to expand that. Our own energy that we're sovereign and that we can control, and that we can reduce our dependence on fossil as well. What I would say in relation to the carbon tax, and again you haven't referred to this, is the carbon tax that relates to home heating oil has been deferred to May 2026. And also the carbon tax gives us the capital to bring about permanent affordability measures for families. We're targeting 60,000 retrofits in 2025 alone, and €558 million next year in retrofits. That's delivering about a third in savings on average, according to the IEA, not my statistics, the IEA statistics. Permanent changes for households, including schemes like the Warmer Homes Scheme. That's a 100% grant to fully retrofit homes and to bring renewables to those homes, but also to make those homes warmer and healthier, and bringing about permanent savings for those households. And we'll continue to look at all other measures on affordability.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy McDonald.
Minister, do you know how humiliating it is for anybody to have to go to family members to borrow consistently to pay their household bills? Do you know how demoralising it is for working people to go out Monday to Friday, work hard, do their best, and still they can't keep their children warm? Do you know how unacceptable, in fact how immoral it is in a wealthy society under a government that boasts billions in surpluses to leave people so stranded, so desperate in these circumstances? And you stand here today delusional, as though you live in another place and in another reality. Here's what Social Justice Ireland says. They report that people are having to make impossible choices, their words, not mine, impossible choices in order to remain within their weekly budget. That's a polite way of saying that people are struggling.
Thank you.
And people are now fearful, Minister. Let me ask you a supplementary as follows. The energy credits.
Time is up.
The energy credits should be reinstated. I'm right, aren't I? Isn't that a correct position in a wealthy society and from your government?
Deputy, I've answered your question directly. And for many families, it's not easy, and the state is there to support them. That's why we've expanded the social protection measures that are targeted at those who need them. You haven't made any reference to that. And if I look in stark contrast to what your colleagues are doing in the north in relation to helping with fuel bills, if you look at the fuel allowance payment in the north of Ireland, it's between €113 and €340. And you probably do know this as well, Deputy. We won't say it here today. It's only available to those over 66 years of age in the north, where you hold the finance ministry. In the south, the fuel allowance is worth about €924 per annum. No, that's true.
Please,
that's
one
true.
voice.
That's true.
One voice.
But let's leave the politics piece out of it. What I can say to families out there is the government and the state will work with them right the way through this winter to bring about permanent affordability measures. I've mentioned retrofitting. You're opposed to carbon tax, and you look at the carbon tax that's invested in people's households in bringing about permanent changes to their homes, permanent affordability measures, permanent health measures as well to their homes. 60,000 homes this year will be retrofitted, Deputy.
Time.
An Taoiseach Osláthar, it seems, Minister. A nice surprise to see you today. Temperatures are dropping rapidly as winter approaches. Household heating bills are rising just as fast. 1 million households across Ireland use oil for home heating. 38.9% of all households, Minister. And the price of their bills has rocketed up by 9% in just 1 month. On its own, that would squeeze any household, but that spike comes on top of a barrage of other price hikes. Energia, SSE, Airtricity, Bord Gas and Flowgas have all put up their prices again. Highly profitable energy companies doing very well, some would say obscenely well, while bill payers face an impossible choice to freeze or to feel the squeeze, trying to make ends meet this winter. Because people simply have no more to give, Minister, and I know you'll be aware of this, because before this cold snap hit, 300,000 people were already in arrears on their electricity bills. And your government has offered nothing to help reduce household costs or to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. And I know you've just said, of course we need to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, but the government is way behind on retrofitting targets. And so carbon emissions continue to rise, and people living in drafty homes have no option but to rely on fuels that are unsustainable, both for our planet and for household finances. So it's 3.5 years since Russia's horrific onslaught on Ukraine. But now in 2025, energy providers are hiding behind what is a geopolitical tragedy to justify price hikes that can't be explained by supply costs. And you've just said about Ireland's energy bills compared to other European counterparts. Our energy bills are still markedly higher, and the driver of those prices is not war, it is corporate greed, Minister. We see that elsewhere too. Supermarkets hiking their prices at the tills, rents and mortgages climbing, and people's personal finances under attack from all angles, having less and less left over at the end of each month. Less for Christmas, less for car repairs, a burst pipe, or any unforeseen eventualities. And what's most galling is the sense that things are much worse than they could be, because your government could be doing more. You've given a message to hang in there, but offering no evidence that your policies are anything worth waiting for. And in your previous response, you talked about report due in 2026. But in a cost of living crisis, people need protection now against corporate greed. Labour has called on the government to force supermarket giants to publish profits. Yet you've refused to do so. You've refused to use your legal powers to control energy prices. You've spoken about meeting with energy companies in September. But what has come of that? Where are the promised hardship funds? Where are the promised supports for households? All we saw was one-off measures stripped away in the last budget in the service of VAT cuts for fast food giants. So, Minister, people are at the pin of their collars, and you do need to take on these corporates. So will you finally tackle profiteering in energy prices, in groceries, and also in housing?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Firstly, Count Corley, can I deal with this charge about the Leader of the Opposition has made and the Leader of the Labour Party that the Taoiseach is in some way absent? He's on government business. He was at the Sorry, excuse me for a second. He was at the G20 summit as well. Should he not go to that as head of the Irish government? Should he not go to the EU African summit? So if I know you're just back from New York as well, right? But he was actually on government business. You're probably over fundraising over there, filling the Sinn Féin bags full of cash, right? No. So,
please resume.
And I'll answer your question.
Deputy, please resume your seat. Resume your seat. Minister, please continue with your answer.
Because energy afford.
Oh, Deputy, please.
Energy affordability.
Continue,
Energy
please.
affordability is critical, and I'm glad you've raised the point, okay? And I've answered already Deputy MaryLouMcDonald. If you look at the measures that have been taken in the budget, they're targeted measures, very targeted across all areas, not just on energy. If you look at social welfare rate increases, if you look at the renters' tax credit, the mortgage interest relief payments as well, all of those targeted at people, significant, a very significant budget for people, unquestionably. And we've got to keep the economy going as well and support the jobs that are there also. Jobs underpin this, and it's the hard work of the state that ensures, and the hard work of people that ensures that we can have the resources to support our people through difficult times, as we did through COVID, as we did through the cost of living crisis, which was acute post the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. So what we've got to look at is now measures that we're taking, particularly on energy, that are permanent. And you've skipped over retrofitting. And on retrofitting alone, we're looking at about 64,500 households this year. 64,500 households will be retrofitted this year. And you're looking at next year, we're providing €558 million through the carbon tax receipts to actually put them directly into homes and into small businesses to reduce their energy costs. And the IEA have said it, not me, that those savings are between about €900 and €1,200 on average per annum. Permanent changes for households. That's what we need. And we do need to expand renewables as well, Deputy. You're correct in saying that, and I've said that too. Last year, over 40% of our electricity was generated through renewables. We've had a further successful auction in relation to solar and wind as well. And we're within grasp of actually becoming energy sovereign in the next 10 years. And that will be critical to reduce our dependence on fossil, and particularly imported fossil, where we are at the vagaries of the market. And you know how the energy markets work, Deputy. We're purchasing forward, and a lot of our companies are. Now, I insisted, and I asked the energy companies as well, to make sure those hardship funds were brought back in place, and they are in place. And no one can and no one will be disconnected through the course of this winter either. And I would say to people who are in arrears, there's assistance from the state there to contact their energy providers, and we can work through measures with them. But our work is not concluded on that, and I'll come back in and supplement.
You can, Deputy.
Well, I would certainly like to hear more on that, Minister. But just first on the Taoiseach's lack of presence here. Of course he must represent the country abroad, but we had understood he would be here today, and it is a courtesy, a common courtesy, that we would be notified in advance of leaders' questions when he isn't taking them. On your response, absolutely we support retrofitting. In fact, what we've been critical of in the Labour Party is the delay in the rollout of affordable retrofitting. And I think around the country, people are frustrated at delay on retrofitting, at missed targets on retrofitting, and at lack of affordability. Just as people are frustrated about delay in the rollout of renewables, we want to see renewable capacity ramped up at great scale. But I think all of us are frustrated at the delays. MARA was established some time ago. We supported that in opposition, but we're still seeing such delay in offshore development. And in the meantime, Minister, this is about fairness. It's about reshaping priorities so that those who have profited most from the crisis will pay their share, rather than seeing the burden of energy costs pushed back on working people and on families and households. And the Labour Party has put forward a series of supports, and we're simply asking the government to adopt those.
Yeah, look, we will obviously ensure that the measures we brought forward are implemented. Now, on retrofitting alone, we've actually retrofitted nearly 230,000 homes permanently across the country, and that's scaling up every single year. And as I said, we'll do about 64,500 this year. And they're permanent changes for households to ensure that they can bring down their energy costs. Now, there is the issue of the energy markets and the cost on the wholesale markets, and the fact that our retail price is struck at the wholesale gas price, even though we're accelerating renewables. And that's a matter that I've raised at every European Council meeting that I've been at. Actually, at COP just last week as well, we introduced into the discussion as well the affordability piece for households, because it is a real issue for households. But what I can say is we will continue to target the measures at those who need it most. And we'll continue to do that as we're expanding our renewables. Now, the work in relation to the Affordability Task Force, we published our interim report. We implemented measures like the 9% VAT rate straight away, like the expansion of the fuel allowance straight away. And there will be further measures coming through in 2026.
Thank you, Minister. Now, Deputy Holly Cairns.
Minister, these are the words of a remarkably strong teenager from West Cork after her rapist was jailed for 6 years yesterday. I could see my house just before he dragged me down the shortcut and started doing unimaginable things to me. It made me feel so defeated. If it can happen so close to home, it can happen anywhere. Aged just 17 when she was attacked as she walked a short distance home, she told the court yesterday that she thought she was going to die. She spoke out because she wanted other victims of sexual violence to know that they're not alone. Ceann Comhairle, I want to commend her for her incredible bravery. Minister, this case highlights yet again why women rarely feel safe when they're out at night, why we don't jog or run when it gets dark, why we tightly grip keys when we walk, why we rarely wear headphones so we can be alert to sounds around us, and why we are hyper-vigilant about men walking behind us when we are alone, because nowhere is safe. Minister, violence against women is an epidemic in our society. Every day in court and crime reports, we read of horrific cases. Women who have been beaten, sexually assaulted, raped, or murdered. We know some of their names, the hugely courageous women who have spoken out, women like Bláthnaid Ralla and Natasha O'Brien. But too often, in the absence of high-profile cases, there is a lack of political focus on this issue. The grim reality is that 52% of women in Ireland have experienced sexual violence. That is more than 1 million people, and that's probably an underreporting. But what's being done about it? Because it seems like pervasive levels of violence against women are something we're just somehow supposed to accept and tolerate as the price of being a woman. Minister, I know the government has done some work in this area. I welcome that a new agency, Cuan, has been set up to tackle gender-based violence. But why has progress on the basics been so slow? How are there still 9 counties in Ireland without a women's refuge? How are women's counselling notes still at risk of being used in trials for rape and sexual assault? How is there still uncertainty about whether offences like stalking and coercive control will be included in a planned domestic violence register? How is toxic, abusive content aimed at demeaning, threatening and humiliating women allowed to proliferate online? I could go on and on and on, but I'm running out of time. Minister, we need an emergency response. We need this to be treated like the epidemic that it is. Today is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So I'm asking you, will this government ban the use of counselling notes from courtrooms, and when will refuge spaces be provided in every county?
Thank you. Minister to respond.
Thank you, Deputy Cairns, for raising this very serious and very important matter, and I read the transcripts of that court case as well, and it's absolutely horrific. It really is, and I just really want to commend the bravery of that young lady. I have a 17-year-old daughter myself. I can't imagine what their family and her, indeed, what she's going through. Violence against women, there should be no tolerance, and that's why and there is no tolerance. That's why the government's strategy of zero tolerance is so critical in that regard. And I know Minister O'Callaghan has been advancing some very specific measures in that regard. And I know in relation to Jenny's law and Valerie's law as well, they are advancing too. I think the establishment of Cuan in the last government was absolutely critical. And as former housing minister as well, I was involved in the third national strategy as well. And we need to make sure that the supports are there for people. But fundamentally, and I agree with you on this, Deputy, the fact that many women, and they're women and young ladies as well, don't feel safe at night, have to change their own behaviour, their habits insofar as where they go, where they run, do they use headphones. That's not a country that we want to be in. And this is unfortunately not unique in Ireland, but we have a responsibility as a collective here in this Oireachtas to work together on this very serious issue. I think societally we do as well. There's very significant education is required, and you've mentioned online content, and you're right, the normalisation of pornography amongst young men in particular is a really, really worrying trend. That's something that through our education system, through our schools, but through our families as well, I think that parents and guardians have to be very open about having these discussions at a very young age. And I speak from experience as well of being a dad in that regard, those type of discussions that we need to have. But I would say it's important that government underpin the measures that we have with funding. and we've increased funding by almost 80 million under 2026, the budget 2026, and that's to support Cuan and the services working to tackle domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And the establishment of that specific agency to deal with this is also critically important. Minister O'Callaghan is also looking to introduce significant legislative change, and that's allowing for the removal of guardianship rights of a person who's been convicted of killing their intimate partner under the proposed Guardianship of Infants Amendment Bill. And the Minister O'Callaghan also secured government approval just on the 21st of October to progress the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences, Domestic Violence and International Instruments Bill 2025. And this includes measures to allow perpetrators of domestic violence to be included on a new register run by the courts and strengthen the law around sexual consent. Convictions will be published online by the court service under a very specific heading of domestic violence registered judgments. So I'm acutely aware, and government are, that we need to continue the focus on this area. There has to be a zero tolerance approach to violence against women.
Deputy Cairns.
Minister, I've acknowledged that some work has been done in this area, but when you say continue your approach to zero tolerance, I think it's important to highlight that the government needs to get real on this issue. You're talking about zero tolerance. Compare that to 9 counties without a refuge space. The reality for women in violent homes in those 9 counties is that they have nowhere to go and are forced to stay in unsafe homes. There's nothing that speaks zero tolerance about that. We're talking about situations where women's counselling notes are allowed to be used against them in court in cases around rape and sexual assault. Nothing about that spells zero tolerance to people watching on today. So like I said, we welcome some of the moves that have been made by this and the previous government around this issue, but it is time to get real and get to grips with the reality of gender-based violence in this country. I asked you 2 questions in my opening. I'm going to ask you them again. When will this government ban the use of counselling notes being used in court? And when will those 9 counties have a domestic violence refuge space?
Minister, please.
Just in relation to the counselling notes matter, okay, Minister O'Callaghan will be bringing forward legislation toward the end of this year or very early next in relation to amending that legislation. That will come forward and that will be brought forward. I've outlined in my answer to you my first answer to you the other measures we're taking in relation to legislation in that regard. I think, as you've raised as well, what's critically important is that there are safe places for victims to go. And I agree with you, and government agree more needs to be done there. But if I look at what's planned this year, 52 new family refuge units by the end of 2026, 45 new safe homes by the end of next year, and 50 new units under construction by the end of 2026. I actually visited the Wexford Centre, the new refuge there in Wexford, which is excellent. There are other areas, and work is advancing on the 9 that you've mentioned. One of them in North County Dublin. I'm very aware of what's happening there in that regard in relation to new refuge spaces there too. So this is something we've got to continue to work on. I just want to assure you it is an absolute priority
Minister.
for both the Minister for Justice and for this government.
Deputy Ken O'Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor. Minister, on the 12th of November, the Taoiseach told this House that legal advice states a minister cannot read protective disclosures. Minister, that claim has a real alarm throughout the country, because if a minister cannot read protective disclosures, the minister cannot verify whether the minister is being misled. It's an extraordinary position for this government to have in a system that has repeatedly accused and attacked and retaliated against the whistleblowers. In a recent case shows that danger exactly. For decades, a cash-based duty exchange system has operated in the Irish prison services. Not secretly, but quite openly, Minister. The WRC ruling has confirmed it. RT Primetime Investigates has exposed it. A senior retired governor called it universal. And in 1996, it's on a record that shows in this House, meaning that we've known about it here for over 30 years. Yet when the matter reached this state legal apparatus of the Chief State Solicitor's Office, it told a statutory tribunal that the system did not exist, and it argued the point relentlessly that if it did exist, it would be fraudulent. So, Minister, we're left with only only two possibilities. The state defended participated and believes in a fraudulent case, or the State Solicitor's Office misled a statutory body and perverted accountability. Both scenarios undermine a rule of law, and both raise the same question: who is the state legal system protecting? Is it protecting the people's interest, the public's interest, or is it saving the government and state from embarrassment? As to this, Minister, part of a wider pattern is the whistleblowers who raise the issue and others have been sidelined and dismissed. A legal advice presented to ministers appears to be contain disclosures rather than deal with the ongoing wrongdoings. The Public Accounts Committee already confirmed that the system is obstructed. On page 10 of January 2022 report, it states that the terms of reference for the protected disclosure investigation were drawn too narrowly, and that suspected criminal activity could not even be referred to An Garda Síochána. Minister, that's not a flaw in the system. To my mind, that's a design in the system, and it is reinforced in writing by the Taoiseach in August 2019, when he was leader of the opposition. A minister told him that a whistleblower's disclosure had been handled through legal advice, treated as a normal personnel matter, and was asked to stand down. And as I understand it, if he was here today, he could confirm it, he did stand down. Well, I have to tell you, Minister, that whistleblower lost his career 4 months later and has been fighting for justice ever since. So, Minister, I put to you direct questions to your government. Is the government satisfied that the legal advice given to the ministers on protected disclosures accurate, lawful and compliant with the Act of the EU directive? Do you stand over the government statement and the Taoiseach statement on the 12th of November? The Minister just... Thank you.
Look, thanks, Deputy. And look, we are committed as a government to protecting whistleblowers, and work is ongoing at both EU and national level to further strengthen those reports. I know you have a PMB, I think, tomorrow morning on this very matter as well, and we get an opportunity to debate it in the round. And we accept that the motion that's been put forward by independent deputies is well-intentioned and that it seeks to increase protections for whistleblowers. But just as an initial review of it, it does appear to ignore many of the provisions which already exist in legislation to protect those individuals. It also contains a number of proposals which would have to be worked on in more detail, may have some unintended consequences too. So we've set some of those concerns out in the counter motion, alongside our ongoing commitment to further review the legislation at both EU and at national level. Look, the role that whistleblowers have is critically important, and they deserve protection of the state. I think your contention at the start that a minister should have the opportunity to read protected disclosures, I think, whilst I understand your intention, I think is flawed also. I think the political process needs to be separate from that. There's a clear process in relation to, well, it does, because every minister will get reports, a general report on protected disclosures, and that's important too. But there has to be an independent, verifiable process for whistleblowers as well, and to be able to have that the allegations or the matters that they have raised to be assessed in a very independent way that's separate from the line minister, I would put it as well, and where they can actually feel that it can be raised in safety and assessed with seriousness. So the Protected Disclosures Act of 2014 is our national whistleblowers protection law. A major amendment to that Act was made in 2022, was signed into law in July 22 and commenced operation on the 1st of January. So this is an area that we take seriously. I do look forward to the debate tomorrow morning in relation to your motion, where you can put forward other matters relating to it. But I think whistleblowers in general in this state have done the state a great service, have raised matters that would not have come to the fore potentially, should we not have had the structures and the processes in place to allow that indeed to happen. And any whistleblower should not in any way, shape or form find that their own situation is affected in a negative way just simply because they have raised a protected disclosure that they actually feel is of great importance to the operation of their department or indeed their agency, or to behaviour within an agency or a department.
Thank you. Deputy
Minister, legal ambiguity protects the powerful. Clarity and accountability protects the Republic. And I'm going to put it to you again because you haven't answered those questions. Is the government satisfied with the legal advice given to ministers to protect the disclosures accurate, lawful and compliant with both the EU Act and the Act here in the Republic? Do you stand over the statements that were made by your Taoiseach on the 12th of November inside in this House on receiving protective disclosure Act under Section 8 and that the Minister can't even read them? Will the Government commission an independent review of legal advice provided to ministers in cases involving corruption, in cases involving criminal conduct and the misuse of public funds? And will you confirm whether the conduct of the Chief State Solicitor's Office in presenting a position that has now been proven false will be thoroughly and fully investigated? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, please.
Yeah, thanks. Are we satisfied with the legal advice that we received, which the Taoiseach read into the House? Of course we are. I think you have an opportunity tomorrow morning, Deputy, to raise specific points around your motion. And, you know, as I said to you in my initial answer, also that this whole area is something that remains under review, both at EU level and at national level. And we want to make sure that the process is fair, it's transparent as well, but that protection is given to whistleblowers, which in the main it is. And that's important. And the Department of Finance will be taking this debate tomorrow. And we look forward to your the arguments that you put forward in that regard. And we're always open to looking at matters whereby, if there are improvements required that are legal, that we will be open to looking at that, and we will. And we look forward to the debate tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Minister, and that concludes Leaders' questions. So now we move in accordance with Standing Order 35. I call on the Chief Whip, Mary Butler, to move the arrangements for this week's business. Chief Whip.
I move Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you. Are the proposed arrangements for this week's business not agreed? Deputy MacDonald.
Ceann Comhairle, under Standing Order 35-301, to propose an amendment to the order of business to strike from the business of the day supplementary estimates for public services 2025, votes 2 and 6. These estimates have not been scrutinised by the relevant committee, that being the Finance Committee. The Taoiseach has repeatedly refused to attend that committee. Let me say that again. The Taoiseach has refused repeatedly to attend committee to allow for the proper and lawful scrutiny of these estimates, and they should not be taken in this House until the Taoiseach presents himself and the appropriate scrutiny is applied.
Ceann Comhairle, 4 weeks ago, the previous Minister for Foreign Affairs gave an indication that the Occupied Territories Bill will be brought back to this House before the end of November. The November schedule will be agreed more or less without that being included. So I'd like to ask the Chief Whip, can she now give an assurance that it would be brought before us before the end of December,
Thank
before
you, Deputy
Christmas?
O'Callaghan. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan, I should say.
Minister, the situation in Gaza remains dire. The attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank have been relentless. A year ago, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael promised to pass the Occupied Territories Bill. The Taoiseach Simon Harris promised to be brought to the Dáil by the end of November. This is the end of November and there's no sign of the bill. So when is it going to be brought to the Dáil?
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks. I agree with the previous two points. I also want to raise the fact that it's 2 weeks now since this new housing plan was published. The main innovation is the removal of annual targets to prevent accountability for the failure of this government to deliver affordable housing while allowing a small few to get extraordinarily rich. Since the plan has been published, we have been calling for a debate on the plan, and it still hasn't been granted. Why are you scared of debating your own housing plan?
Murphy,
is this going to turn into, like what we had with the Housing Commission report, week in, week out, we'll be demanding debates. You'll be saying we're happy to debate it, but for 6 months we didn't get a debate. When are we going to get to debate your housing plan?
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. The last number of weeks at the Business Committee looking for to bring Cairns, who are getting a budget of 12.2 billion from the state and who are not accountable for much of that money that's been spent. Also the Mercosur, where the IFA and the Irish Farmers Journal done investigations last week to find out basically rotten meat, contaminated meat from South America, and could end up in Irish tables. And also in relation to Galway West and Dublin Central, in relation to moving the rate, we need a discussion on that issue.
Deputy Gary Gannon.
Ceann Comhairle, on Amendment 35, on the Standing Order 35.3, I wish to move an amendment to the Order of Business for Thursday's afternoon session that we have statements on the Minister's new changes in relation to immigration, which are quite significant. And when we respond as we should, we're often told we're shutting down debates. We'd like to have a debate this week on your changes to the immigration system. So that
Do you have the amendment, Deputy?
Yes, on the 35 of the debate.
You have 30 seconds. If
yes,
you read the amendment, please.
I would like to amend Thursday's afternoon sessions.
Thank you.
To have statements.
Chief Whip to respond.
Firstly, in relation to the issue raised by Deputy MaryLouMcDonald, Amendment 35.3, my preference was to attend committee to set out the case for the supplementary estimates for vote 2 and 6 Cairns, and I had to set aside time to do so last Thursday. I regret that this did not prove possible, in particular because there was a precedent for the Government Chief Whip presenting previous requirements for supplementary estimates for votes in the vote group of the Department of the Taoiseach. That would have happened back as far as 2004, when the Chief Whip at the time, Mary Hanifin, attended, in 2022 when the Chief Whip, Jack Chambers, attended, and in 2023 when the Chief Whip, Minister Hildegard Naughton, attended. This is a time-sensitive issue that we will vote on the 3rd of December next week. In relation to the issues raised on the Occupied Territories Bill, the Housing Plan and Uisce Éireann, and also the second 35.3 amendment in relation to the changes to immigration. We can discuss those on Thursday at the Business Committee. I will also discuss with the Minister, who I have no doubt will come into the Dáil to discuss any changes that have been made. So the order of business stands, Cairns.
Thank you, Chief Whip. All right, deputies, are the proposed arrangements for the week's business agreed to and the proposed amendments negatived? Not agreed. I am now putting the question the question is that the amendments proposed to the arrangements and the order of business are hereby negatived, and the proposed arrangements for this week's business are hereby agreed to. Na teachtaí atá ar thaobh Aberdish tá, na teachtaí atá ina chuine Aberdish ní. Sílim go bhfuil an ceist riche. Vote all long bells 6 and 4, deputies.